Hello, I'm Mitra Sorrells in the PhocusWire studio with David Gunnarsson. He is CEO of Dohop. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's talk interlining, of course. I'd love to hear you tell us your take on what the real benefits are for travelers when there is this interlining versus just what's offered with the alliances. And then for airlines, what concrete problems would you say that modern interlining solves?
Absolutely. So I think the big thing around kind of interlining beyond alliances and airline partnerships in general is just to create more choice, right? So from a traveler perspective, you'd rather have the ability to select kind of any journey between any 2 points with a connection somewhere, rather than having that only being what a couple of airlines or an alliance has decided to put in the market, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the sort of the ethos behind that. And then you can go beyond airline partnerships only and go into rail and these other things, but which
Right.
starts to get interesting. But primarily, it's the choice for the customer to do what is best for them, instead of other, like the principal providers of the service be deciding what they would like.
Yeah.
Now, what modern interlining solves, I mean, from a kind of pain point perspective, so interlining as a setup for airlines is pretty complex. So getting that set up, getting that live and maintaining that, there are complexities, there's cost around that. There's fare filing, for example. So one or both of the airlines have to file a fare for the entire journey,
Right.
which in kind of modern interlining is more just sum of sector, so a sum of two fares that are already in the market. It can be things around, making complex agreements that are sort of either both ways, two-way interlining or one-way interlining. There's complex things around how the fares of one airline map onto the fares of the other airline. Most of this is solved and made simpler in terms of how we deliver this. So I think for the most part, trying to make it simpler for the airline to set this up and deliver this to the customer, and then trying to make it simpler to the customer to book and then travel.
Yeah. It's kind of removing the complexity all around, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, that complexity goes somewhere, but we take it on board and solve problems by writing code or creating processes or whatever it is that just make sort of life easier in general.
Okay. So as airlines start to move from PNR to offer order, what other transformations do you think can happen?
So I think, we're in the early days of that, right? And I was at a roundtable here earlier, and we talked about NDC and whether that was successful as a rollout. And I think the entire room agreed that it is not. And we probably, that whole, it was a rabbit hole that we shouldn't have gone down, possibly as an airline industry. But as we get into these offer order, settle, service, deliver, transformation, I think, that creates a lot of opportunity if you get it right. However, then the question is, what does getting it right mean? How do we do that as an airline industry? I think that's where the complexities probably start. But I do think this can unlock, if you think from our perspective with respect to partnerships, it can just make everything simpler. And maybe what we do is possibly a sort of an intermediate step from the ways of old and the reservation systems and these things into the offer order world. So I'd say we're probably helping airlines on that journey. But once you get into the offer order world, hopefully there's also use for us there. But I think in all, it's a brilliant opportunity for the industry to just modernize overall.
Okay. So we certainly know when we start to talk about an interline journey, we know that the handling of checked baggage can be a bit challenging
Absolutely.
at times. So I would love to hear your take on what needs to happen, from the airports and the ground handlers versus the airlines and their technology to make that baggage check through really more reliable.
It's an interesting kind of point, right? Because what the airlines have to do is to make sure that when the customer starts their journey, there's a tag on that bag that tells it where to go when it gets to the transit airport. Now, depending on the hub airport, and that's where the airport ground handling sort of piece comes in, they have various different capabilities of how they sort and scan and all of these things with bags, and it's not it's more of a one-to-one sort of process. So one pair of airlines operating over one airport That's a unique process. They can't sort of replicate that.
Right.
So I think the big thing there is how do we make that a sort of a replicable, scalable process that can go across multiple airports and multiple airline pairs? Then you're really onto something.
So we have to talk about AI, of course.
Absolutely.
Seems to be what everybody talks about these days. Would love to hear your take on how you really see it changing the travel process, and if there are any use cases where you think it will deliver benefits, and then what's needed to make that a reality.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I was on a panel at a conference 2 weeks ago talking about AI and how that's going to change the world of travel. And I think it probably starts on either end right now. So a lot of, airlines and travel sellers are using AI in customer service,
Right.
which is where you would expect it. But also in the planning process. So how do you, when you start to think about planning a trip, you'd expect people who are sort of AI natives, they would just talk to ChatGPT or whoever and just, so you'd expect it on either end of the process.
Right.
And I think, we have to think AI can help us along most steps in the journey. But it starts at the beginning and at the end, and then what can change, if you think about how this can sort of dramatically change, not just slightly augment what we're already doing.
Right.
I think that has to do with data and your question on what's the unlocker here. That is really making sure that the data that sits within the airline business or within airlines can be easily read and understood by the large language models, so that they can ultimately search and make transactions and all of these things. I think that's probably the big shift that needs to take place, is to just get that data into a proper structure.
It's not going to happen overnight. Right?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting time, certainly,
It is.
as all of this evolves.
Absolutely.
So, wonderful. Well, David Gunnarsson, CEO of Dohop, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.